everyone. My name is Jamie Fraser. I'm the director here at the Albright Institute. It is lovely to see so many of you here in the Institute for the lecture today, and those online as well via Zoom. You're very welcome. As per usual, this is a recorded lecture that once it's edited will go up into our YouTube page. So if you can't get enough of one lecture from Felix, you can see it all again in a little bit as well. Before I introduce Felix, though, just a couple of announcements. For those who have been to the lectures for this year, you know what I'm going to say, and that is this year is a very special year for the Albright. This is our 100th year in this building, so our centennial year. So watch this space. We're about to go live with announcements. But what it means is that on the evening of June 28th, we're having a big gala celebration event, dress up, and then the next day we will have our very early, Sunday the 29th of June, and early July 4th barbecue in the afternoon, definitely dressed down. But yes, you must come dressed either way. So watch that space for those announcements. You'll also know that part of that centennial is an opportunity for us to raise funds to swell our endowment. This is our lifeline that says we've been here for 100 years. It means we can be here for another 100 years to come. And one of the ways you can do that is to buy a paving stone and have a name inscribed on it. It can be your name, it can be Hugh Jackman's name. As long as you pay $250, it doesn't matter. And Ashraf is laying these out in a pathway through our orchard down the back seating area. If you want to do that, you can talk to me or go to our website. You'll see one of the drop-down tags on our website for donations or centennial campaign, and it'll take you through the route then. If you want an inscribed paving stone in time for the centennial celebrations, get your skates on because we're about to go into production and manufacture. That's the centennial. The next few lectures, we've got two more coming up. Next week, Wednesday, 7th of May, we, of course, run our lectures normally on a Wednesday at 5 o'clock. We're here on a Monday because of the various national holidays or national days on Tuesday, Wednesday. Next Wednesday, May 7, Professor Eric Klein. Eric is actually coming to stay at the Albright for 2 months as part of his Fulbright Fellowship. But he is speaking about one of his recent books, After 1177 BC, The Survival of Civilizations. And then following that, Wednesday, May the 14th, our very own ECA Junior Fellow, Timothy Sailors, is speaking, Rethinking the Early Christian Book in the East Mediterranean. And like all our lectures, including today, supper to follow, courtesy of our assistant chef, Ahmed Dawood, and of course, Hisham. Hisham still can't come into work at the Albright, so he's made a lot of this supper in his home kitchen, which has been trucked in by Ashraf as a mercy dash from the West Bank. Now, to introduce Felix and Agnes. Stick that over there. Oh, and one very quick announcement. Someone left this drink bottle here last week. If it's yours, it will be over on that ledge. Thanks, David. It is a real pleasure to welcome this evening Dr. Felix Höflmayer. Felix is a distinguished archaeologist specializing in the Bronze Age history and chronology of the Southern Levant and Egypt. He leads the Levantine Archaeology Research Group at the Austrian Archaeological Institute of the Austrian Academy of Sciences, and of course has co-directed the Austrian expedition to Tel Lachish in Israel from 2017 to 2023. Felix earned his PhD in Egyptology and Classical Archaeology from the University of Vienna in 2010 and has held research positions at the German Archaeological Institute and at the Oriental Institute of the University of Chicago. His work is copious in its output. It integrates radiocarbon dating with historical and archaeological data to refine Eastern Mediterranean chronologies. He has received significant accolades, including the START Prize from the Austrian Science Fund for his project Tracing Transformations in the Southern Levant. He's also a lecturer at the University of Vienna and has been, in the past, an associate fellow of the Albright Institute here in Jerusalem. And although Felix is presenting today, it's very much a co-presentation with Agnes Woitzuck. Agnes down the front. Agnes is an archaeologist affiliated with the Austrian Archaeological Institute at the Academy of Sciences, where she contributes to the research group Archaeology of the Levant. Agnes earned her bachelor's degree in the Oriental Studies and Egyptology in 2018 and is currently pursuing a master's degree in Ancient Oriental Philology and Oriental Archaeology. Between 2017 to 2019, she participated in the Tracing Transformations in the Southern Levant excavation project, and in 2020, she served as a study assistant at the Institute for Oriental Studies at the University of Vienna. Since October 2019, she has held an assistant position at the Austrian Academy of Sciences, focusing on the archaeology of the Levant. Both of them, however, were stuck with potsherds in the Lachish container in the car park of the Albright. I hope having lots of fun. Felix, over to you.
Thank you very much. Thank you, all of you, for coming out this afternoon. As you can see, I have changed in the meantime. I was not stuck in the our shipping container for the whole time. Unfortunately, Agnes was, representing me in the shipping container for the last hours. This is, as Jamie said, I'm very thankful for the invitation to present on our work here at the Albright. It's great to be back. And it's actually great to present on a project that we have been doing since a few years now, basically tracing the biography of a very important excavation that unfortunately was left unfinished and unpublished, the Austrian-German excavations to Tel Balata, Shechem, which started as a project of the then Imperial Academy of Sciences in Vienna in 1913. And although the last field season happened in 1934, as many of you probably know, I chose the number 1939 because it was the last year that Ernst Sellin, who directed the excavations, actually tried to get back into the field. And then we all know what happened in September 1939, and then the world had completely other problems. So if you think of Austria and the Holy Land or Jerusalem, then you probably think of the Austrian Hospice, where actually we are staying right now for this week. Very nice building, and I see a few people in the audience actually from the Austrian Hospice, so welcome to the Albright Institute. And a few might know that there are many different connections between Austria and the Holy Land. I just want to mention a few. Since 1846, Austria had a vice consulate here in Jerusalem. Since 1853, the Austrian Lloyd, this shipping company that connected Trieste with the Holy Land, was going to Jaffa. Many of you know that in the old city of Jerusalem, there was an Austrian post office, which you can see on the down to the right. And of course, in 1863, the Austrian Hospice opened, which you can see on the left. And also the Austrian Hospice has a connection with archaeology, because in this state, you just see the first story. Today, this building has a second story. And the architect of the second story is actually Leopold Krakauer, who was the father of Trude Krakauer, and then Trude Dotan. So there is a fun connection between Israeli archaeology and the second story of the Austrian Hospice. What you probably don't think about, that Austria has a very short but active history in the Holy Land before the First World War, and this is partly what I'm going to talk about. We will structure our talk in 6 different points, starting with a short prologue, which I would call the quest of Siegfried Horn. Many of you will know the person Siegfried Horn, who actually started to re-excavate in archives and in museums part of the Austrian material that was excavated in Shechem. I will talk a little bit about the site as such, then present Ernst Sellin, who was the director of the excavation at Shechem and who dug at Tel Ta'anek and at Jericho before, and introduce him as an archaeologist and as a person behind these projects, because from his early projects, you can already glimpse some of his, how should I put this diplomatically, more problematic characters. And then we will talk in extenso about Shechem, and I will introduce a couple of other figures that you have to know. That is Camillo Praschnicker, who worked with Sellin in the field, Franz Böhl, who helped funding the Shechem project in the 20s and in the 30s. Gabriel Welter, a German classical archaeologist, who became actually a rival of Ernst Sellin in the directorship of Shechem. And finally, Theodor Wiegand, who is sitting in Berlin and trying to get funding for the excavation and having all kinds, well, he was the person who actually had to solve many difficult diplomatic and personal crises between Gabriel Welter and Ernst Sellin. And finally, because this is not an ended project, we are still planning to do a lot of things. I will talk a little bit of how we envisage the final publication of the Austrian and German excavations at Shechem. And I will end with an unexpected legacy you can find in modern literature about Sellin's excavations. So let me start with Siegfried Horn. You may know Siegfried Horn is a well-known archaeologist who was active at Andrews University in Berrien Springs, Michigan. And there you have actually the Institute of Archaeology and the Siegfried H. Horn Museum. And he was a very important person because he actually was part of the American expedition to Shechem after World War II. And since he was born in Germany and was a native German speaker and only immigrated in the 40s to the United States to finish his PhD in 1951, he was actually looking through the old diaries and notebooks and tried to collect all the material that Sellin and his team left behind. And since he was a very meticulous scholar, he kept daily diaries, not only daily diaries, but he kept an index to his own diaries, which you can actually look up. You can look up a visit to Vienna and you get the guide, I don't know, volume 7, page 254, and volume 12, page from 2. And thanks to Larry Garrity from the La Sierra University in Riverside, California, where these diaries are kept, we had the chance to actually check how Siegfried Horn became interested and where he got his documentation from. And so we read, for instance, Shechem, 18th July, 1960. He was talking with the director of the German Protestant Institute back in the day, and that was Kuschke, and they found the old documentation, or at least part of the documentation, in Muristan, here in Jerusalem. And he basically notes that they have 2 notebooks of Praschnicker. Praschnicker was the archaeologist for Sellin, 1913 and 1914, and some plans about the North Gate and the big trench and the palace and so on. And later on, because he knew, of course, that this was an excavation that went out from the Imperial Academy of Sciences in Vienna, he actually chose to visit Vienna in August of 1962. And because he was in contact with the director of the department in the Kunsthistorisches Museum in Vienna, and was checking about the finds that went from Shechem to Vienna. But unfortunately, as we learned in 1962, Egon Komorzinski was on vacation and his deputy, Dr. Noll, had no idea where the material was located. So that was an unsuccessful visit to Vienna, but I'm very sure that he enjoyed the sights. Anyhow, later in 1964, he got more lucky. Dr. Komorzinski was actually present in his office, and he was able to review all the finds that came to Vienna from the excavation. The interesting thing about that is that that Siegfried Horn was only able to identify the material based on the notebooks of Praschnicker, on the find journals. Because in the Kunsthistorisches Museum, we don't have a piece of record for these vessels. And when we were in the Kunsthistorisches Museum, actually Agnes, I identified a lot of additional stuff that was not identified by Siegfried Horn. So we are not entirely sure whether we have the full collection yet, but we are working on that. We also learned from Siegfried Horn that he got belegte Brötchen and Coca-Cola while having lunch with Egon Komarsinski, and in the Aber, he published two preliminary reports on small finds and the pottery from Shechem excavated in 1913 and 1914. But this is only a small selection. The actual variety is much bigger. So that is the question of Siegfried Horn. And he basically started this whole thing of trying to locate all these different documents that are still preserved. So I guess I don't really have to introduce Shechem to you. It's of course located at the slopes of Mount Ebal near modern Nablus, and is very known from the Egyptian sources of the Bronze Age, the execration text, the Sobek stela, the Amana letters, but most importantly is known for its from the biblical sources, different books from the Hebrew Bible, and the rich Iron Age layers at the site. There have been many different excavations at Shechem. It was originally identified in 1903 by the German archaeologist Hermann Tirsch. And in 1908, there was a hoard of bronze weapons that was excavated at Shechem that actually, sparked a lot of interest, and which Sellin actually saw in Jerusalem, and then later decided that he would like to excavate there. Then we have from 1913 until the last season in 34, the Austrian-German excavations, and finally the American excavation in the 50s, 60s, and in the early 70s. And recently, well, not too recent, but in 2014, Handan Taha and Gerrit van der Kooi actually compiled all of this data in a very useful book where you can actually go back and check. They try to locate as much as archival material as possible. And this was a good starting point for the additional stuff that we started. Of course, Tel Balata Shechem is still discussed to this day. I'm just quoting two recent papers by Holly Winter about the Shechem courtyard complexes, and by David Osishkin on the actual date of the rampart wall A. So it is an ongoing discussion, as with most of the major sites in the southern Levant. So who was this person, Ernst Sellin, who instigated the first excavations at this site? Ernst Sellin, although he excavated for the Imperial Academy of Sciences in Vienna, he was actually born in northern Germany, German Protestant, and he was very interested in archaeology. He was inspired by Schliemann and his digs in Mycenae and Troy and so on. But his father said, okay, boy, you really have to study something useful. You are doing theology and not archaeology. So he studied Protestant theology in Rostock, Erlangen, and Leipzig, but also did some Assyriology and Oriental studies in Leipzig. And finally, in 1897, he became professor of Old Testament exegesis and biblical archaeology in Vienna at the Protestant faculty of Vienna, which was at that time not part of the University of Vienna, because being in Austria, very, very Catholic country, you can't have the Protestant faculty as part of the Catholic University of Vienna. In 1908, he left Vienna for Rostock and then went to Kiel and then to Berlin, where he was emerited. And Sellin, as an archaeologist, he basically directed three excavations. The first one at Tanach in 1902 to 1904 on behalf of the Imperial Academy of Sciences. Then a second excavation in Jericho, which he began while he was still in Vienna, but continued when he was already back in Germany, which was funded by the Deutsche Orient-Gesellschaft. And finally, in 1913 to 1914, by the Academy of Sciences, started in Tel Balata and continued from 1926 to 1934 with the German Archaeological Institute as the host institution. When he came to Vienna, he was immediately interested in starting an excavation in the southern Levant. So we looked through all the papers, and I'm just quoting some relevant stuff. Already in 1900, he actually suggested to the Academy that based on his trip that he made in 1899, that it would be a good idea to excavate Tel Ta'anek. He was actually on the lookout for Megiddo, but on his way, he saw this other side and decided that this would be a very nice place to start his future work. And in January 1900, he basically, that's what you do. You submit a funding application to the Imperial Academy, which is not as formal as we do now, our funding applications. And he asked for 12,000 crowns and said, okay, the Academy can, by the way, also organize the excavation permit. The Academy, that's what funding bodies do. They set up a commission to actually evaluate this proposal, and they got quite an illustrious commission with a lot of people who actually had experience in leading expeditions to the Ottoman Empire and other places. So there was the classical archaeologist Otto Bendorf, who led expeditions to Lycia and to Ephesus. He actually started the Austrian excavations in Ephesus, which are ongoing to this day. David Heinrich Müller, who led the expedition to South Arabia. Leo Reinisch, who was famous for his long travels through Egypt and East Africa. Then the director of the numismatic cabinet at the museum, and also Adolf Behren, historian and politician. And they decided something which is mostly known from modern funding agency. They decided they will grant him a matching grant. If you get your 6,000 crowns on your own, then we will contribute the same amount from our budget. And these have been different times. Sellin was very successful in getting funds from all different kinds of Austrian industrialists. One of them, Arthur Krupp, who was the Austrian line of the famous Krupp family, who owned a metal goods factory in Berndorf in Lower Austria and basically produced cutlery and cookware also for the imperial house. He was a Protestant, but very, took very much care about his Catholic workers and actually commissioned also a Catholic church for Berndorf. He granted some money, and here's one of the old advertisements that you could see. The Schöller brothers, who were industrialists, bankers, and one of the Schöller brothers was also the consul general of the United Kingdom in Vienna. They owned a rolling mill in Ternitz and a bank house, which actually exists to this day, the private bank of Schöller and Company. Also both Protestants. So we think that one of how he approached actually these people, the common denominator is the Protestant denomination. So apparently he was seeking out possible donors in his own group of people. Also Karl Wittgenstein, who is actually the father of the philosopher Ludwig Wittgenstein, who was a very wealthy Viennese industrialist who owned a steel mill in the nowadays Czech Republic, was called the Steel Baron of the Emperor. He also gave Sellin some money. And finally, Anton Dreher Jr., him I like most because his father was the inventor of the lager beer. And he sponsored Sellin for several years on his different excavations. And he was also called the Beer Baron of Vienna, an Austrian billionaire, had very different interests, but was also interested in archaeology, at least to a certain extent. So Sellin got his 6,000 crowns, got another 6,000 crowns from the Academy, and was able to start. Like you did in this day, well, you have a cook, you have a servant, you have 150 workers, and you have basically one theologist and two people who are being responsible for logistics and so on. Of course, the one was Gottlieb Schumacher, who we know very well for his excavations in Megiddo afterwards. And the other one, Nicola da Todi, a German-Italian person whom we cannot track now. He was a local resident in Haifa, I think, and he was with Sellin and also working, for instance, with Reisner in Samaria. So he was a local person to go to when you want to organize something. So we are also trying to trace the local network of people when people from abroad come to excavate or do projects. There's also a numismatic a classical archaeologist, Rudolf Münsterberg, who accompanied Sellin. But as you know, it was this kind of excavation, very few archaeologists, very lot workers. And in the archives, we find all these kinds of anecdotes when the German the German people from Haifa come over to the excavation and spend the night and sing songs and so on. It's also interesting that they imported Dreher beer, which is the beer that was produced next to Vienna in Schwechat, and they also imported German mineral water. So the beer and yeah, getting stuff from Europe apparently was very important from them back in the day. The first excavation was published very swiftly. So he dug from 1902 to 1904, and there were 2 volumes who came out in 1904 and 1905 in the in the press of the Austrian Academy of Sciences. But after the publication, there were soon critical reactions to the way that how he excavated, and one of them was the person who identified the site of Tel Balata, Shechem. That was Hermann Tirsch, who commented a lot on the ongoing excavations in Palestine back in the day. And he pointed out that, again, a German theologist comes to Palestine, and he lacks archaeological training, he lacks archaeological experience, he lacks archaeological observation, and this is really a major drawback about the Sellin excavation. He also criticized that the pottery was drawn and not using this modern technique of photography. So people, especially the archaeologists, were not very happy with the way Sellin worked. And he also pointed out, since Sellin afterwards, I mean, this was published in 1907, so people were already aware of the fact that Sellin now starts in Jericho. So he pointed out, okay, before you're starting something new on the next site, please finish what you have started in the first site. Nevertheless, Sellin was unimpressed, and he tried his next site in Jericho, where he made a trial excavation in April 1907. Again, he compiled his usual donors from the Viennese industrialists, and he pointed out to the Academy that he hopes to make a real excavation in 1908 and hopes that he gets, again, funding, a matching grant maybe from the Academy. But unfortunately, the Academy had already other plans in Egypt, so they turned him down, and he was looking for different funding sources. This time, he appointed an architect for the plans and so on, and this was Theophil Niemann. Theophil Niemann was not really experienced in archaeology, but his father was a big name in the Austrian excavations in Ephesus, so it's likely that Sellin just asked his colleagues, and one of them said, well, you can have my lad, he can draw plans and so on, and you can take him along. We found out that the architect Theophil Niemann later on built a church and one residential building in Vienna. So after that, he more or less left archaeology and did a job as an architect. 1908, as mentioned, Sellin didn't get any funding from the Academy, so he turned to the Deutsche Orient-Gesellschaft, and they appointed different architects to accompany him. One of them was the architect Felix Langenegger, which was a very good choice. It's the caricature on the right-hand side, because he worked with Koldewey in Babylon, so he had first-hand experience of big excavation areas and so on. And he also got the German classical archaeologist Karl Batzinger, who already had experience in documenting synagogues at the German expedition to the Galilee. And again, of course, Nicola da Todi was his person to rely on locally, and up to 200 workers. So at least we have now one theologist, one archaeologist, and one architect, but still a huge workforce. Yeah, here's one of the pictures, in very orientalizing style, of course, in Jericho. And in 1908 is also the time when Sellin finally said goodbye to Vienna, because he tried very hard to incorporate the Protestant faculty into the proper University of Vienna, and the Ministry for Culture and Research and so on. They always tried to, well, they stepped on the brake and said, okay, we don't want this. And finally, Sellin said, okay, then I'm accepting a call from the University of Rostock. That's it, I'm going back to Germany. And this was actually commented in the press in a very negative way, not because Sellin left, but because the ministry didn't allow the Protestants into the University of Vienna. So there are a couple of press reports who actually criticized that the most prominent Protestant theologists are leaving Austria and going back to Germany. What we can also see from the archival data, and this is something new, and this is something that will go on throughout Sellin's lives, there have been some conflicts in the field. In the next season, there was a new architect who joined the team, Arnold Nöldecke, who was also trained by different archaeologists and so on. And he wrote in his memoirs that there was certainly a certain arrogance of the archaeologist and Sellin, the theologist, towards the architect who was, they thought just here to make plans and so on. And there's a very nice anecdote because Nöldecke decided to put workers somewhere else and stopped excavating in a specific area. And Sellin said he missed something and sent the workers back. And then a little bit later, Sellin told Nöldecke, the architect, that he finally found the tower that the architect had missed. And Nöldecke, because he saw what is actually there, asks back, if you don't mean the lime kiln that is so eagerly dug up, then I would be actually interested. And it turns out it's not only a lime kiln, it's also a very modern one. So I guess the criticism of Sellin's archaeological experience might be taken seriously. So now we heard a little bit of Ernst Sellin and his person and his approach to the field. Now we are coming to the side of Shechem and the whole drama that unfolds after a while. As mentioned, Shechem was identified by Hermann Thiersch, who went with Hölscher on a trip through Lebanon and Palestine, basically trying to find out which sites were easily accessible, which sites you can actually excavate. We learned that they spent some time at Dr. Schumacher's excavations in Megiddo. Afterwards, they also visited the abandoned excavation of Sellin in Tel Ta'anek. And later on, near Nablus, they found a site which they identified with Shechem, and they pointed out a trial excavation here seems highly promising. Then, a little bit later in 1908, Tel Balata is more or less in the archaeological news again, because some villagers excavated, I think for a basement or something for a house, and found a very extensive hoard of metal weapons, which are now in the museum in Munich. And Sellin and Watzinger were able to examine this hoard of bronze objects in Jerusalem and suggested to the German state that, okay, somebody should actually buy this because this is very important stuff. But back at the time, the German museums were mostly interested in stuff from Babylon and Assur and Mesopotamia, and there were no departments for archaeology from Palestine. So the private gentleman Friedrich Wilhelm Freiherr von Bissing buys this assemblage for his private collection, and the first publication is actually only in 1926 as an appendix to the Dutch summary report on the excavation at Shechem. Wilhelm Freiherr von Bissing was a very eccentric person, to put it mildly. He was an Egyptologist and a vivid collector of mostly Egyptian antiquities. He was very wealthy. He worked a little bit on the Catalogue Général in the Egyptian Museum in Cairo. He privately funded the excavation of Ludwig Borchardt of the Sun Temple in Niosare in Egypt, and later returned then to the University of Munich, where he became professor, privately funded, and later on accepted a call to Utrecht, but then got emeritus and went back to Bavaria, and basically was sitting in his rural estate and writing books and journals. He was a very early member of the German Nazi Party, but was later expelled. At the same time, he was a practicing Protestant, so there are many conflicting aspects in his life and also personal life. In the end, he sold most of his collection, and part of this collection ended up in the Egyptian Museum in Munich. Not all of it. There was actually a Dutch research project going on, trying to locate all the objects that went to Bissing's collection, which was called the Bissing Link, which I really find very funny. So they also helped us in tracking down different things. So Sellin decides to excavate in Shechem. Again, he writes to the Academy of Sciences, and this is always nice at the beginning. Having heard that the Imperial Academy has funds available, I might put forward an application to use these funds. We're not entirely sure where he got this information. It is true that just a few months earlier, there was a general donation by, again, another Viennese industrialist to the Academy for Archaeology and so on. But anyhow, he suggests, I mean, he's now in Germany for several years, he suggests that, well, he has this history with the Imperial Academy, so maybe if they fund half of the excavation and send an Austrian archaeologist, we can more or less do a joint venture. The donation that he heard of was from this guy, Dr. Horace von Landau, who actually donated 350,000 crowns, partly for buying the estate of Eduard Glaser, who was collecting epigraphic material, but also 250,000 crowns for basically participating in the competition to excavate the oldest history of mankind, and so on. So in this case, there was a prolonged negotiation process between Sellin and the Academy, partly because the Academy was also aware about all these critics that were responding to Sellin, and Sellin, having this more or less trauma from Jericho that architects are basically questioning him, he made very explicit that anybody who joins him in Shechem, they must obey all my instructions. Not because basically he had this unpleasant experience with the second Jericho expedition, and he points out there can only be one boss at an excavation, of course, that has to be Sellin and nobody else. And he really insists on that. He also thinks a little bit of whether to get an architect first or an archaeologist. He points out that so the Academy actually found an architect who would be willing to go with him. And he expects whether he is a pleasant and easygoing person, because this point is too important to be overlooked when undertaking an excavation in the Orient. So he's not so much interested in the technical skills, but mainly whether this person would actually obey everything that Sellin says. And the other thing that we learn, for instance, is his approach, because, well, you do a trial excavation, you hire, what, 50, 100 workers, and yes, an archaeologist and an architect might be a good idea, but actually 3 intellectuals is probably a disproportionately large group of intellectuals to send on an excavation. So in the end, the Academy says, yes, we will fund this excavation, again with a matching grant. And for the first time, we hear also something that the Academy wants something in return, basically fines. And there's a letter of Sellin to the Academy where he points out, well, yes, but the laws in the Ottoman Empire is actually that you can't export stuff. But if it's not possible through official channels at present, I will do what I can to make this by any private means. We are not still sure, because we lack the documentation, how actually the fines got to Vienna. We know from other Austrian excavations in the Ottoman Empire that there were some exemptions between Vienna and the Sublime Porte, so they had direct deals to get things out of the Ottoman Empire. He also gets a few new donors, for instance, Ernst August II, the Crown Prince of Hanover and the 3rd and last Duke of Cumberland. So he was also active in the nobility. And finally, Shechem starts in 1913 and goes on in 1914. The archaeologists who accompanied him, one of them is Camillo Praschnika, who at that time was the secretary of the Austrian Archaeological Institute. I will talk about him in a minute. And the other one is Adolf Grohmann, who will I introduce as well. We also see in the list of funding Freiherr von Bissing. So the guy who bought the hoard was also interested. And I don't remember how much he paid, but he also contributed to the fund, and we haven't been able yet to track down the Godefroy Familien Fideikommissstiftung in Hamburg, but we are on to that. Camillo Praschnika, the archaeologist who was basically the Austrian part sent to Shechem, was a classical archaeologist who did his PhD in 1908 and served in this time as the secretary of the Austrian Archaeological Institute in the 20s. In the 20s, he was a professor at the German University in Prague, but still went to a few seasons to Shechem because he already invested a significant amount of work. And later on, since 1935, became the director of the Austrian Archaeological Institute. And the other person who accompanied Sellin is Adolf Grohmann, who was actually an Arabist who completed his PhD in 1911. Also, he went to the German University in Prague, but he very soon became a member of the Nazi Party and was also involved in the expropriation of Jewish libraries. And after 1945, he somehow made his way back to Innsbruck, and in his last years, well, he also had a position in Cairo at some point at the Fuad University, but became a honorary professor in Innsbruck after World War II. The thing with Shechem, although I haven't mentioned the publication of Jericho, but this was also published in a timely manner, from Shechem, we actually only have preliminary reports. The preliminary reports from 1913 and 1914 are very short. They're, as you can see, just a couple of pages, and totally not very useful. We have better preliminary reports from the excavations in the 20s and 30s, but so far, as mentioned, no final publication has appeared. In the summer of 1914, they already had everything set to go to Shechem, but of course then World War I broke out and the world had very different problems. After World War I, Germany and Austria funds have more or less dried up, especially in Austria. Also Ephesus had problems getting funding. And it was only in 1926 and 1927 that he was able to acquire German funding again. And it was not only German funding, it was actually a big, different donors that he got. He got a Methodist bishop from the US. He got a former student of him, Franz Marius de Liagre Böhl, who by then was in the Netherlands to form the so-called Shechem Committee to raise public awareness and to raise funding to finance the excavations. And he had the so-called Notgemeinschaft der deutschen Wissenschaft. It's basically a society who tries to raise funding for where you can apply, who sponsored the excavations as well. And this Notgemeinschaft der deutschen Wissenschaft was the institution that brought the big rival of Ernst Sellin into the excavation, and that was Gabriel Welter. Camillo Praschnika joined as well, and we already know him, and Franz Böhl, who is this person. He was born actually in Vienna. He studied partly under Sellin, and his father was also a theologist at the University of Vienna. His name was Eduard Böhl, so he was basically more or less same of the same group, and later on became professor at the University of Groningen and later on the University of Leiden, where he founded the famous NINO Institute, the Netherlands Institute for the Near East, which exists to this day. He was very active, and actually the reason why Sellin contacted him after World War I again is because he had concerns that British-mandate Palestine would not grant an excavation permit to a German institution. So he got the Dutch people on board. The Notgemeinschaft der Deutschen Wissenschaft, the German funding body, the representative was important for Sellin was Theodor Wiegand. Theodor Wiegand was a classical archaeologist and directed many different excavations in Priene, Milet, Didyma, Samos, Pergamon, and later on became the president of the German Archaeological Institute. And he got himself built a very nice villa, which you can see on the bottom right side in the outskirts of Berlin, which to this day serve as the headquarters of the German Archaeological Institute. So he was sitting in Berlin and directing the funding and sending Gabriel Welter to basically assist Sellin in the field. Now, Gabriel Welter was a difficult character. Again, a classical archaeologist since 1921. He mostly resided in Greece, partly on private money, partly on his wife's money. He excavated in Egina, in Samos and Naxos. Later on, he also became an honorary citizen of Naxos, but he was sacked by the German Archaeological Institute in Athens by 1937, not because of political reasons, as far as we know of, but mostly because he didn't publish. He excavated a lot, he published very little, and was a challenging character, to say the least. So when he actually got to the site in 1926, he immediately approached Praschnik. Okay, what the hell is going on here? How can you excavate in this way? And Praschnik told him, well, he compared Sellin to a rubber ball. Basically, okay, if you confront Sellin, he gives in, but immediately afterwards, he just continues as he did in the beginning. And Welter was writing repeatedly to Theodor Wiegand that this is a problem. You cannot direct an excavation at such an important site like Sellin, and Sellin has to be replaced. He also was very eager that to change the system in Germany to actually send archaeologists to the Holy Land, not theologists. This should be a science. It's not a theology, it's archaeology. And he basically urged Wiegand and the German authorities to introduce modern scientific archaeology to Palestine and not stick with the religious theologies. So there's a lot of correspondence between Welter and Theodor Wiegand. And he was also describing the way that archaeology was done in Palestine. So he basically says, theologists of all nations stick in haphazard manner, amateur work, before World War I. And thank God, after the British took possession, things changed, and the Antiquities Authority, headed by Garstang, now actually requires serious scholars that assist the theologists who actually know something about the Mediterranean region. What is especially funny to read in Welter's reports are his characterizations of the archaeologists working here. So for instance, Mr. Richmond, the successor of Garstang in the Department of Antiquities, tall and slender, prematurely aged, tired, and table talk about tea and stuff, and only interested in Arab work. And since we are speaking at the Albright Institute, I also have to put forward the characterization of Albright. You can see why he calls him round-headed. I think that's pretty easy to spot. Very philologically oriented, weak in archaeology, but eager to learn. And you have to talk with him in a methodical manner with a touch of pedantry, which he actually likes. So it's really fun, and he just goes on page after page characterizing these different people active in the Southern Levant. Welter was partly successful. He actually managed to convince Wiegand and the other authorities that Sellin should not continue in his way. And he was appointed as, well, there was a long process where he tried to get appointed as director. And there's a long thread of correspondence where Sellin refused. Then Sellin gives in, okay, I'm the director, but I have no time to be on the excavation. So while I'm away, you are the acting director. And you can see this also on the a permit from the Department of Antiquities that the permit is actually going to Sellin, but Sellin is not here, and Welter will be director in his place, and so on and so on. But Sellin was very unhappy, and he very much tried to sabotage Welter. And Welter was basically only able in 1938 and 1931 to direct excavations. And he was basically complaining, okay, it's not possible. I'm the excavation director. I'm not the assistant of Sellin. And Wiegand wrote back to him, okay, it's not as bad. We just wanted to please Sellin, and please don't make a fuss about, and it will all be fine, and so on. And they actually made sure that the Dutch money is not going directly to Sellin, and Welter can control the Dutch money, and so on and so on. But in the end, Sellin basically stepped up and made an ultimatum, because they negotiated that when Welter excavates, he sends all his reports also to Sellin with the constant progress reports and so on, not only to the Department of Antiquities, not only to Wiegand, so that Sellin is always on top of things. As I've mentioned, Gabriel Welter was never very good at publishing, and he was also not very good in writing reports. So reports got delayed and delayed and delayed, and Sellin was more or less, kept in the dark. So at some point he wrote to Wiegand, okay, this has to stop. Welter is abusing his situation, his position, and if you're not sending another archaeologist, then I will just cut my ties. And from other letters, we actually know that he was eyeing different sources of funding. So end of story, Welter lost his job again and went back to Greece. And in the end, Sellin got reinstated. Of course, in the meantime, the whole international archaeological community of the Southern Levant more or less knew about this ongoing drama, and of course saw this. They were also publishing papers against each other. And in the end, also Wiegand had to write to Böhl, to Leiden, that he was actually very dissatisfied with Welter because, lack of report. And he concluded that, yes, he's a brilliant but very difficult individual, and he's much concerned about his future. And in the end, he was right about his future. So what are we now trying to do with a final publication of the Austrian-German excavations? I mentioned final publication has never appeared. Sellin was working on it from 1934 onwards, and a bombing raid to Berlin in 1943 destroyed Sellin's house and the apparently finished manuscript. But working ourselves through many different museums and archives and so on, we found a lot of stuff that we can still use to put something together to present at least what we know. So this is not a complete list. This is already, again, out of date, but we tracked down, of course, finds and documentation and archival material in Jerusalem, in Leiden, in Vienna, in Cambridge, Massachusetts, in Harvard, in Berrien Springs, the Andrews University, in Berlin, in various archives, museums, and institutions. And just to give you a brief overview of the variety of material, we have this big pottery collection at the Kunsthistorisches Museum. Just a few examples of the nicer things, which more or less, except for the short preliminary report of Siegfried Horn, more or less remains unstudied. A lot of shirt material, which has not been published, a lot of unidentified material that we were only able to find in the storage of the Kunsthistorisches Museum, sitting there with the find journal and looking through the unidentified material. A very nice, and by poor luck, we got what we are calling a lot of photographs, what we call the Kaplan collection. It's not our Kaplan here, not Jacob Kaplan, but Irene Kaplan, the secretary of the Institute of Egyptology, who approached us after a talk and told us that her father, in a secondhand bookstore in Vienna, acquired a set of archaeological photographs, which apparently were the photographs of Praschnika. So we got over 130 photographs from situations in the field, from objects which were already laid out for plates for the publication, Cypriot stuff, but also scenes in the field. This is apparently payday. You can often see Sellin. There's a lot of material ended up in Harvard. This is mostly what Siegfried Horn assembled. There are a lot of plans that can be used. And you can actually see this is also written by Praschnicker, as you can see on the left-hand side. In Berrien Springs, we finally located the lost find book, which was in the possession of Siegfried Horn, and he never returned it. So in the book of Gerrit van der Kooi and Hamdan Taha, it's still labeled as missing. Now we found it with additional other stuff that he apparently borrowed from Harvard University and never returned. And this is actually very important because this so-called Fundbuch from the summer campaign of 1930 and the spring campaign of 1914, when you look at the drawings, you see on the right-hand side, you see you see an N, you see a W, you see an M, and of course N stands for Nablus. This is the material that stayed behind. W stands for Wien, Vienna. That is stuff that went to the Kunsthistorisches Museum. But occasionally we also get an M, and M stands for Munich. So also Bissing got something, and we were able to identify the same piece in the museum in Munich, and they had no clue that this piece is actually from Shechem. So now that we know that the Academy of Sciences received fines for giving money, Bissing received fines for giving money, now we have to track down all the other donors as well and find out whether there's, I don't know, a grandchild somewhere which has something on the attic that looks like Near Eastern pottery. Also Leiden, after Eduard Böhl joined the expedition, they got a fair share of material from the 1920s, and we also have the find division lists from this time, which also remains unstudied to this day. Also in Leiden, we have the archives with, again, photographs from Böhl, who joined a couple of seasons in the field. We have the Böhl estate. This is kept at the Institute. Here you can see Sellin in the field. Of course, we have the archive of the Department of Antiquities, which is thankfully fully digitized and available for download, so that is a very easy access. And also in all these different institutions, you find a whole lot of plans and sections and measurements and so on. So our idea for the final publication would be to assemble all this material that we can get hold of, and of course present what is still there of the preserved finds and documentation, but also to paint the history and the genesis of the Austrian-German excavation project, to include what were the funding networks, what are the local networks in Palestine, who were the private donors, what interest they actually had in sponsoring an excavation, and also to track the biography of the find objects that ended up in so many different places. We also want to look at the archaeology in the colonial framework. As mentioned, we wanted to trace the local networks. If anybody knows more about this enigmatic Nicola da Todi, who sometimes shows up, but we cannot really get hold of him, please send us an email or talk to us afterwards. Gottlieb Schumacher is, of course, well mentioned. Also the local labor whom they hired, we know that it was common, we know this from other excavations as well, to hire Egyptian foremen, but also Sellin did this already. And of course, what was actually the political situation of a German excavation in British Mandate Palestine. And last but not least, we also want to trace the reception in the general public, of course, in the academic publications, the critiques that were announced, but also what kind of information entered newspapers and I don't know, lectures and other things. And with that, I come to a very unexpected legacy of the Shechem project of Sellin. Of course, I'm pretty sure that you all know this person, the famous novelist and Nobel laureate Thomas Mann. He wrote 4 books that were called Joseph and His Brothers from 1926 to 1943, which he started in Munich and finished in exile in his house in Pacific Palisades, which, thank God, was not destroyed by the recent fires in Los Angeles. And in the archive of Thomas Mann, there's a newspaper clipping about Sellin's excavations in Shechem. And he underlined different parts that in the end, more or less word by word, went into his book, Joseph and His Brothers. So the excavations of Sellin and Praschnika and other people somehow ended up in world literature. I don't know if this is the only thing, but we will look if there is anything more. And with that, I thank you very much for your attention.